here we are with Within the Chaos. Take it away, Rodney.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host,
Rodney Shortridge,
and co-host,
Robin Dalton.
Oh, thank you, Holly and Tara. From deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, welcome everyone, and thank you all for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight, along with my little luck of the Irish co-host, Robin Dalton.
Hey, y'all.
Tonight, our special guest is Andrea Perron. Andrea is the author of the trilogy House of Darkness, House of Light. These books chronicle the childhood she shared with dead and living alike in a colonial-era farmhouse in Harrisonville, Rhode Island during the 1970s. So, and also, since it's St. Patrick's Day, I'd like to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day and let everybody know that my co-host, if you don't know, she's Irish.
Yes, I am. Very Irish.
So how's your week?
Well, just probably like most. Could be better, could have went worse. So I can't really complain all that much. Well, I could, but ain't nobody gonna freaking listen.
Well, listen, I hear you complain all the time.
Well, I know, but you're the only one, and you know.
Well, I enjoyed this week. It was good and warm. Finally got a little taste of spring, but unfortunately, it's going to end up getting cold again this weekend. Damn it.
I know. I'm going to turn my freaking heat on tonight.
I've already got mine on. I don't know what you're talking about. But, well, I guess we'll quit chit-chatting about ourselves and let's get our guest on. Let's see here. I'd like to welcome everyone. Our special guest, Andrea Perron. Hello, Andrea, and thank you for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just great. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
It's an honor to have you on. We look forward to getting to know you and getting you to tell your story and about your books and just anything you want to talk about. That's one thing about my format. I just lay the table open for people to speak their mind. So can you go ahead and tell me? Oh, it is. It really works good. It really surprised me. But if you want, you can go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I'll give you the abridged version because I've had a very interesting life. But I grew up in hi, Robin.
Hello, Andrea. How are you?
I'm very well. If I sound a little gravelly, it's because it is pollen season in Central Florida. My burgundy-colored van has turned kind of lemon yellow green, and I can't breathe. Other than that, I'm doing great. I don't require oxygen. That stuff's for mere mortals. I'm fine. But I grew up in a haunted house, probably one of the most famous haunted houses in this country, if not in the world. Made even more so by the film The Conjuring. It has kind of exploded into an international phenomenon, but people who've seen the movie don't realize that there's a whole huge backstory behind The Conjuring. The Conjuring got about maybe 5% of our story exactly accurate, and the rest of it was literally conjured up in the minds of two screenwriters who were chastised every time they tried to tell the truth, every time they tried to, put direct scenes from the books and our story into the movie. And, it's, I don't think anybody was mean to them, but from what they told me, the general consensus with the brass at Warner Brothers was you don't want to scare people right out of the theater, so tone it down. I think it's one of the few times in history that instead of a story being embellished by Hollywood, it was altered to such an extent that it was unrecognizable to our story because they just didn't want to terrify people and literally empty the theater. There's no point in making a movie if people can't stay for the whole length of it. So, even though there are a lot of people who think that The Conjuring was horrifying all in its own right, that was nothing compared to what actually happened in that house. The movie made it look like we were there for, 2 or 3 months, that the Warrens moved in, solved all of our problems, made it all go away. We all lived happily ever after. We actually lived in the house for 10 years. The Warrens were a very, very small part of that, even though they wanted to help us. I truly believe that. They were in over their heads right from the beginning, and they actually, with the energy that they brought into the house, stirred things up even more. There was no exorcism in the house. Ed Warren would never have conducted an exorcism on his own. He had far too much respect for the Catholic Church and its traditions, trained as a layman to assist in exorcisms, but he would never have actually performed one on his own. My mother was not possessed. My mother was attacked. If she was possessed, quote unquote, it was for a very, very brief period of time. But there was no question that there was something trying to get to her in that house. It was, and that's very frightening when you're a child and you see your mother changing in inexplicable ways, and it was very difficult. We were afraid for her, not so much afraid of the spirits, and there were numerous spirits in the house. But starting in 2007, I began writing this trilogy of books, House of Darkness, House of Light, because it was time to tell the truth. And I don't know, it was as if an alarm clock went off in my head and said, you've got to do this now. Now it's the time to do this. And literally within 6 weeks, before I had started writing the books, had not even told anybody in my family yet that I was doing it, because I didn't want them to discourage me. And I was the only one still living up in Rhode Island at the time. All the rest of my family lived in Georgia or Florida. So it was easy to keep it a secret as long as I didn't pick up the phone and tell a Perron, which is that's the fastest way for anything to rip through the universe, is tell one of my sisters. Boom, everybody in the family knows in 5 minutes. So I kept it under wraps for a while. I wanted to have something of substance to present to them and say, look, I'm working on this. But honestly, it was within just a matter of weeks that I got my first phone call from a Hollywood producer. So the stars had aligned, as it were. He knew nothing about my book. He just knew about the backstory from the Warrens and wanted to make a movie, which ultimately became The Conjuring. But even though it bears no actual resemblance to how our lives were during that time, it was full of little, what I call, cosmic kisses. There were little parts in that movie that told me that had to happen the way that it did, that it was okay that it went out the way that it did, because ultimately it got our story around the world on a grand scale, and anybody who is legitimately interested in knowing what really happened in that house, the whole true story, all they have to do is Google the Perron name, and boom, up come the books. So I've got, many tens of thousands of readers around the world who really do know now what happened and how it fundamentally changed my family. We moved into that farm in 1971, a perfectly normal family, and we left 10 years later, a paranormal family. All of us had been profoundly touched by spirit. All of us had been changed in inexplicable ways. All of us had felt the presence of something greater than ourselves in that house, and it was actually what solidified our deep-rooted spirituality as a family, because when we were in crisis, when there was evil lurking, when there was trouble in paradise, it was the invoking of God that would stop whatever it was that was happening. And that's the only thing that would stop it. And it worked every single time. And it could be something as long as it was heartfelt and sincere. All you would have to say is, God help me. And that was enough. It really was remarkable, and I would say even miraculous revelation for me to understand that we were indeed being protected and watched over by something that truly loved us. And it was the bond of love between our family members that ultimately helped us, was our ultimate salvation. My mother had to ask permission of the spirits to let us go and let us leave that farm. And we thought that when we left the farm that would be it, that we would leave them all behind, but nothing could have been further from the truth. In actuality, profound attachments were formed and have remained lifelong. But I do not have in any way an adversarial relationship with the spirits that we met at the farmhouse. That's not true for everybody in my family, but it is true for me. And I actually love them, and I feel a great depth of compassion for them because something caused them to be stuck here. And even though they don't necessarily have any sense of time, that it just does not exist in their realm, it doesn't seem to me, they are functioning and dwelling in some kind of an alternate dimension. And I truly believe that place is a portal that was cleverly disguised as a farmhouse, because not only did we have the ability to peer into the past in that house, but the spirits had the ability to see us and peer, therefore, into the future. So I think that it's a very significant haunting in that respect. There was engagement at times between us as individuals, as mortals, with the spirits that dwelled in the house. And I think that for myself, speaking personally, it was the most enlightening decade of my life and formed the foundation for everything that I became as an individual, and also the foundation of this story, which has touched the hearts and minds of countless thousands of people around the world.
Wow.
Well, can you explain, without giving too much away, because I know you want people to read your books, but can you explain a little bit what started it, what was going on? Maybe you can, give a little insight to that. What started the paranormal experiences and what kind of experiences you was having?
Well, we had visited the house a number of times prior to actually moving in. It took about 5 months to finalize the sale of the property. Mr. Kenyon, who was the owner at the time, met my mother the day she went to look at the place in June of 1970. My parents closed on the property just before Christmas in 1970. And then we moved right after the holidays were over in January 11th, 1971. So we had an opportunity to get to know Mr. Kenyon a bit, and we loved him dearly. He was one of the kindest, most gentle souls that I have ever encountered in this lifetime. I truly loved the man. All of us did, my parents included. He did not divulge that the house was haunted. He tried to tell my father the day that we moved in. He took him for a walk and he said, "Roger, for the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night." But that didn't gel in my father's head. My dad did not realize exactly what he was trying to tell him, and didn't know for many months later. However, the first day that we moved in spite of the fact that we had visited the property a number of times as a family, None of us had any paranormal experiences at the farmhouse at all until the day we moved in. And the first thing that happened was Mr. Kenyon was moving out, or finishing his move out the day that we were moving in. And it was in the middle of a snowstorm. It was freezing cold. And we pulled in with a caravan, a truck, and cars, and aunts and uncles, and it was just crazy. There were so many people around. And my father opened up the back of the moving truck, and he put a box in my hands and said, "Take this to your mother in the kitchen," which I promptly did. I went through the parlor door, which was the closest to where I was, took a hard right turn into the dining room. There was Mr. Kenyon wrapping up the last of his precious objects, boxing things that had been in the corner cupboard, built-in china cabinet in the dining room. And there was a man standing in the door jamb between the dining room and the front hallway that led to the kitchen. And this man appeared absolutely solid to me, as if I could have just walked up and touched him. The only thing that I thought was odd about him was his manner of dress. It seemed somewhat archaic. And I do remember thinking, does everybody dress like this out here? Because it felt like we were out in the boonies, compared to where we'd come from. And even though we were still in the tiny little postage stamp-sized state of Rhode Island, we were out in the woods, coming from the suburbs of, Providence. So I said good morning to him as I walked by, and he did not respond to me. And then my sister Christine came into the kitchen, and she said, "Mom, who's that man with Mr. Kenyon?" And so she saw him as solid as well. My mother said, "There's nobody with Mr. Kenyon. His son's on the way. He's not here yet." So kind of looked at each other because, she realized I had seen him. I realized that she had seen him. And then Cindy walks in the kitchen with her own box, and she's like, "Mom, who's that man with Mr. Kenyon?" And my mother's like, "There's nobody with Mr. Kenyon." And then Nancy came into the room, and she said, she leaned over to say something to Cindy, and she said to her, "There was a man with Mr. Kenyon, but when I walked by, he disappeared." And that was,
wow.
The little girls seeing something for the first time in our lives that we had never seen before. And interestingly, the apparition did disappear, but then he came back. And he came back while my father was talking to Mr. Kenyon in the middle of the dining room, and we're all standing around, and we see him, but my father didn't. And that was the first clue to us that something was very strange here. None of us were familiar with, all of us had seen Dark Shadows and, stuff like that, but, this was the whole supernatural, the whole, that was not even on the radar. We were little kids, and not something that was ever discussed in our family. It was nothing that we were prepared for, nothing that any of us had consciously thought about. No more than little kids dressing up as ghosts on Halloween, or putting on a witch's hat. We were children. So this was very new and unusual to us. And within a couple of 3 days of moving into the farmhouse, being new to us, of course, it was a huge house, absolutely enormous house. And my sister Cindy came crawling into bed with me late one night, and she said, "I hear voices in my room." And I said, "Are you sure it's not Christine? Because Chris would talk in her sleep sometimes." And she said, no, it's not Chris. She's sound asleep. It's voices around my bed. And I said, "Well, what are the voices saying?" And she said, "They're all talking together at one time. They're all saying the same thing over and over and over again." So I asked her what it was, and she said, "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." She couldn't distinguish voices, male or female. Yeah. And considering that house as is was completed 40 years prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and was present for numerous border skirmishes, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Dorr Rebellion. It was, excuse me. Oh, God, can't breathe. Okay, who's got oxygen? Oh, God. It was, I guess, not surprising. That house was used as part of the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. The people who owned it at the time, the Arnolds, were abolitionists. They were Quakers. And the town historian at the time, when we moved there, told us that, many people passed through that house on their way to Canada. So it has a long, sordid history. There were numerous events that occurred at the house. When you think about it, 8 generations of one extended family lived and died in that house prior to our arrival. And I feel absolutely certain that a number of them decided not to leave. It's been an interesting thing to relive in terms of asking every member of my family to dredge up their most powerful memories of the place so that I could include them in the trilogy. I mean, it took 1,500 pages to tell our story in its entirety. 10 years that we lived in that house, and the books start prior to our arrival at the house when we still lived in Cumberland, and details the entire series of events that had to happen exactly the way they did for us to end up at the farmhouse. And then the trilogy ends after we leave the house, and we realize that it was a permanent part of us. As my mother once said, we could leave the farm, but the farm will never leave us.
So I know you touched base on some of the events that were happening in the home, but what are some of the events that happened that finally made that your parents started to see this and said, maybe the girls are, seeing something we're not seeing?
No, my mother knew very quickly. My mother was under attack in that house. There was a spirit that repeatedly appeared to her who threatened her.
Now, and this happened rather early on?
Yes, it began rather early on for my mother. In fact, that first month that we were there, my mom went out to the barn on a very, very cold morning after she'd gotten 4 of us off to school. My little sister April was only 5, so she wasn't in school yet, but she was asleep on the sofa in the parlor. And my mom went out to the barn just to look at it, see if it was suitable to, maybe in the spring receive in a horse, which we had been promised after we moved there. And out of nowhere, out of the rafters of that barn, came a whirling hay scythe, the kind of circular knife that you bale hay with. And it was spinning at a remarkable rate of speed. My mother at first heard it before she saw it, and she thought that perhaps an owl had been trapped in the barn because it sounded like wings, or some kind of a bird or something. And she looked up, and here comes this whirling knife at her, and it hit her on the side of her throat and sliced into my father's leather bomber jacket that she was wearing, and she had a number of layers of clothes on, and that's really what saved her from a very serious injury.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she didn't even, at first, that was so shocking to her. It knocked her to the floor. It hit her with such force that it knocked her down, and, she's not sure if she fell just from the shock or from the impact of it. But I remember coming home that day and my mom just sitting on the sofa, just kind of staring out into space, like she couldn't even process what had happened to her. And it wasn't until later that she realized that that was the very first attack of many. People think that spirits, ghosts can't harm you, but that's wrong. Everything is energy. And if that energy is focused in a specific way, then it can actually manipulate objects. And we saw that over and over and over again at the farmhouse. The spirit that came after my mother threatened her, actually chanted an incantation that began, "'Twas mistress once afore ye came, and mistress here will be anon. Will drive ye out with fiery broom, will drive ye mad with death and gloom." And there was so much death and sadness and loss around that place that it's really hard to describe. I certainly can't do it in a few minutes, but I will tell you that it changed each one of us. I mean, we realized when Mom opened up the fireplace in the parlor in March of the first year that we were there, all hell broke loose in that house. My mother was, beaten senseless with a heavy wooden coat hanger. We had doors that refused to stay closed, even if there was string and rubber bands and, everything knotted around the latches to keep them closed. I mean, literally short of nailing the doors closed in the house, which didn't make, a whole lot of sense if you needed to get in and out of a room, There was just no way. I mean, the house came alive around us. The spirits did not appreciate any of the physical disruption in the house. Not only the energy of 5 rambunctious little tomboy girls, but my mother actually changing the house, making improvements to the house, opening up a fireplace that we couldn't use. It had been sealed shut for who knows how long. Many, many, many different incidents that occurred, but the most striking and the most horrifying incident was when the Warrens came with an entire entourage of people. It was in August of 1973. And, my mother never called the Warrens. She never sought them out. She didn't know who they were. But Keith Johnson and his group of paranormal investigators came to the house a couple of months prior to the Warrens. And we don't even know how they knew to come to us. Keith said he had received a phone call asking for help. And so he came to the house where he was given the address. And my mother said, "Who are you?" And I'm Keith Johnson with Pyro, we're from Rhode Island College, and, so on and so forth. And she's like, "How did, I never called you. How did you, how did you know to come here?" For the longest time, she thought that perhaps one of her close friends or confidants who she had shared some information with had perhaps contacted them, but everybody said, "No, it wasn't me. I didn't call anybody, on your behalf. I wouldn't do that." So we never figured out exactly what cosmic conspiracy was going on, where something brought Keith Johnson into what became the Warrens' case after he informed the Warrens, after having some very serious experiences himself at the farm, that he brought the Warrens in, and then they unceremoniously kicked that team to the curb and said, "We'll take it from here." But them taking it from there resulted in a seance that they foisted upon my parents. Anybody who has seen our episode of Paranormal Witness, that's probably the closest recreation to what actually happened in the house. And that aired Halloween week last October, our episode of Paranormal Witness. They did a good job with it. They did a little combining of stories that I thought, really? But for the most part, they got it pretty pretty right on. But that night, they brought a medium with them who kicked wide open the doors to the netherworld and invited everyone in, and something attacked my mother and literally picked her up and tossed her from the middle of our dining room to the middle of our parlor, and everyone that was present for that event thought that they had just seen my mother die. It was a terrible thing, and my father threw the Warrens out and their crew, their audio people, their camera people, their everybody that came, including a priest. It was represented in the movie that, we were somehow like godless heathens compared to the devout Roman Catholic Warrens, and nothing could have been further from the truth. My father was born and raised Catholic. He was educated in a Catholic school, which of course private school, and he was an altar boy his entire childhood and was destined for the priesthood when he met my mother. My mother converted to Catholicism to marry my father, and all of us were baptized and raised in the Catholic tradition. And we were a spiritual family. I mean, we didn't have pictures of Jesus hanging on every wall or a crucifix in every corner, but that didn't mean that we weren't practicing Catholics. And it was actually our parish priest who, after he got wind of what was happening at our house, approached my father on Easter Sunday, I think our second or third year there, and suggested that my father take his family and worship elsewhere. And that was when my father got very angry and felt abandoned by his church, and we stopped going to church. We never went anymore. We, at that point, I guess, became more pagan than anything and found God right in our own home and in the woods surrounding it, out in nature. And we were all very prayerful, and we were all very devout individuals and truly, spiritually in touch. But we never practiced in church anymore after that because we had been turned away by those that we needed the most to help us. And so that's the real truth of what happened.
So I take it that the Warrens and the people that was with them made it worse than helping?
They did, and I don't think that they meant to, Rodney. I really don't. I really believe that they tried to help us. I truly do believe that. But it's interesting because after I finished writing the trilogy, and the last volume of it, the third book, was released in 2014, and actually 7 years to the day that I began writing it. I began writing the story on August 7th, 2007, because I marked it on my calendar. And the last book was published August 7th, 2014. So 7 years to the day. And that number, there are 7 members in my family. That number comes up consistently around myself and my family. So I thought that was very interesting. But I went in, I had a personal crisis after I was finished with the books. In a way, I felt like my purpose had been served. I started having visions of my own demise, like there was no reason for me to even hang around on Earth anymore. I'd done what I was here to do. Had started having a series of nightmares and visions that I couldn't explain. And I was working with a gentleman named George Lopez, and I did a radio show with him for 2 years called The World Awakening, and, we traveled together and lectured together, and, we just do all paranormal stuff together. We're good friends, and he and I were on our way back from about 2 years ago now. We were on our way back from a Paracon, and I confessed to him what was going on with me and how freaked out I was about it because, I felt lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life after I didn't want to just, spend the rest of my life promoting the trilogy or talking about The Conjuring or the fact that the Annabelle doll had absolutely nothing to do with our story and, things like this. That's how Hollywood likes to weave things together. They're very cynical like that. But I told him that I was feeling kind of shaky inside and a little bit lost. And so a few days after he arrived back at his home, he called me late one night to check on me. And I was, pretty much in the same emotional, mental state as when he dropped me off in Georgia. And he said, well, let me tell you a story. And we spent the next couple of hours on the phone and with me just basically listening. And he told me this incredible, incredible story. And when he was done, I said, well, George, you have to write this down. And he said, but I'm not a writer. And I said, excuse me, I am. I'll do anything to help you get this story out into the world. And thus, my latest book, In a Flicker, was born. And it is actually the brainchild of George Lopez. And he told me that about a quarter of a century ago, it was planted in his mind, literally planted in his mind. He went to bed one night, woke up with this story in his mind, and then didn't do anything with it for 25 years, and had mentioned it to a few people here and there through the course of his life, but not, nothing that he ever wrote down and never put into words, but every detail was there. Every detail was there, right there in his consciousness. So I convinced him to write it down. I told him, give it to me in whatever form it comes out. Just keep writing until you've got the whole story down. And then turn it over to me, and we'll work together, and we'll fine-tune it, and we'll turn it into a novel. And In a Flicker was published last October. And it is the most fascinating story I've ever read in my life. I've devoured thousands of books. I was an English major, philosophy major in college. I can't tell you how much I had to read in order to get those degrees. But this blew my mind wide open. I had never even conceived of such a thing. And so we premiered it at the Vampire Lestat Paranormal event with Anne Rice down in New Orleans over Halloween weekend with all the witches and the vampires and everything last October. And it's just doing phenomenally well. But I'll tell you, some very spooky, strange things have surfaced around this story. And even though it's really more a story from history, it's a mix of fact and fiction from history. There is a paranormal element to it. It's got a wicked supernatural twist. But in recent weeks, as it gets further out into the world, reports are coming back to us from our readers that it is triggering all kinds of paranormal activity in their lives. Things that weren't happening before they read the book that are happening now, including full-body apparitions appearing in their house, as from what they believe to be characters from the actual historical figures from the book. And I said to George this morning, after I sent him a letter from one of our readers who couldn't finish the book, it freaked her out too much. Because this was all happening in her home as she was trying to get through it. And this is an 82-year-old woman, okay? She's not, and someone of great standing in her community, and she's not making this stuff up, you know what I mean? She's a real well-grounded individual, and I've known her my whole life, just about. And she said, Andrea, she said, I love you, and I want to support you, and I'm so glad I bought the book. She said, but there's something about it. I don't know what it is, and I've heard it over and over again that I sent it to George, and I said, George, what's going on here? He said, why am I getting letters like this? He's like, I am too. And it's almost like we've stirred up the spirits and, raised the dead from 150 years ago, which is when this story is set. And people who are super sensitive to the paranormal are reading this and having interactions and altercations with spirits around this story. It seems to be a bizarre kind of trigger. And it wasn't written to be that. It was written to tell a story from history in a new and a different way, mixing some quantum physics in and, stuff like this. But, it was certainly not our intention to give people horrendous nightmares or have apparitions, appearing beside their bed as the book lays on their nightstand. I can't really explain it. I can't explain it, but this is a new phenomenon, and I posted on my Facebook wall today, anybody, please, if you're having experiences around In a Flicker, tell us, because I would like to, that investigative part of me, that curious part of me wants to know exactly what's going on here and what has been triggered by the writing of this book. And it's an amazing series of events that have happened around it. I can't, we don't have the time for me to tell you all of it, but I would encourage anybody that is interested in history, that is interested in science, physics. It is the best story that I've ever read, and I can brag about it because it was George's story. All I did was kind of fill out some characters and add some detail, and not to minimize my contribution to the book, but it was his idea, and I turned it into a novel. But it had a tremendous effect on me too. There are some parts of this book that are just about impossible to read. You have to put it down and walk away from it because it shakes you up so much. So, pardon. Oh, so dry. Hold on. It's time for a little lemonade, just a sip of lemonade.
Okay.
You got right.
Take a shot of rum, whatever floats your boat. We're good.
No, thank you.
Down here in our neck of the woods, we give you some of our mountain medicine. I'd cure you.
Oh, no. You know what? I know about your mountain medicine, okay? I went to Gettysburg a couple of years ago, and there were several para people that showed up with the best moonshine you can even imagine. You couldn't even tell you were drinking alcohol, okay? I know what you people brew up there. Don't start with me. I'm still getting over it.
Well, I know you have a passion for ufology, and
I
this
do.
is, I have my own paranormal group, and one of my theories, I think that the paranormal and ufology somehow intertwine. And if you don't mind, can you tell people what ufology is for the ones who don't know, and your experiences and your opinion about it?
I will. I would say that that's my purest passion in life. Ufology, however you want to pronounce it, is the study and research of extraterrestrial engagement. And anybody that, I'm sure everybody in your listening audience, anybody that listens to this knows what a UFO is, unidentified flying object. But I go way beyond that. I don't believe in extraterrestrials. I know that there is extraterrestrial engagement with the planet. And the reason that I know that is because I am a contactee. I am someone who has experienced this throughout the course of most of my life. And the first And I really think that there's some point of correlation and integration between extraterrestrials, angels, and spiritual activity. But I still don't know what that is, and I'm kind of running out of time to figure that out because I'm 57 and I had my first encounter with spirit when I was 12, and I had my first encounter that I recall with extraterrestrials when I was 13. So, this has been something that I have studied lifelong, that I am most curious about, and yet in some ways not curious at all because I've seen so much, I've experienced so much, and, I found it at first much easier to just focus on ghosts and spirits. More people seemed accepting of that than they did, UFOs, and I didn't want to mix the two, but eventually there was no getting away from that. I got asked a point-blank question during a very high-profile interview about whether or not I had ever had experience with extraterrestrials, and I admitted yes, that I had. And this ended up being taped and put out all over the world. So there's no backtracking. Not that I would. I love them. And if that makes people in your listening audience laugh or giggle or shriek with terror, I can't help their personal response to what I'm telling you, but I feel a sense of connection with them that I cannot even describe with words in this language or any other. The closest that I can come to is pure love. I feel very protected. I feel watched over. There's no time that I get on a train or a plane or in an automobile that I don't have a sighting, that they make sure that I know that they're watching over me. I am about as sane and stable and grounded an individual as you will ever know in your life. This is a part of my life. It's not, I don't consider it paranormal. I consider it completely normal, in the same way that being surrounded by spirit is completely normal to me. It might not be to everybody, but it certainly is to me. And I've seen some incredibly remarkable things in my life that lead me to speak very passionately on this subject because I want the world to know. I did a Paracon up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last August, and, word passed through that very large crowd like wildfire that I could call our galactic family, and they would come when I called. And I had a whole group of people approach me and say, come out with us tonight. Come out with us. Show us what, let's see what can happen. And I was like, oh, sure, yeah, that's great. Hold on, let me get my stuff. and out we went into, like no big deal to me. Went out into this parking lot, and I had 40 or 50 individuals with me, and started, just asking them to come and make their presence known to the group of people that I had with me, that I was with, people who were open to them and absolutely willing to have their own experience. And I'm telling you, I had people sobbing, just sobbing and laughing and celebrating with joy because they came from every quadrant of the sky. I mean, we were right on the Canadian border. It was phenomenal in every conceivable sense of that word. And all I did was sing to them. That's all I ever do. They have their favorite songs that I sing to them. And when I do, they come. And I don't care who thinks that's crazy. I don't care. It works. And, there was a time when they did not come when called. They came when they damn well felt like it. But now they come to me whenever I ask. And it's because they know I love them, I think. And I get incredible messages. And, we're at a very pivotal time in the course of human history. There's, it's not a mistake that we're here now to experience this and to raise the vibration of the planet and to raise the level of consciousness of the planet. You know, whenever you put good, positive, loving thoughts out into the world, thoughts are things. Everything that exists in the world first began as a thought, a concept, an idea. And so I tell people, you know, think properly. Use your mind to direct your life. Don't just let life live you. Live your life deliberately. Think deliberately. And part of that knowing that exists within me comes from them, comes from the power that I've been empowered by knowing them. I don't call them aliens because they're no more alien to this planet than we are. They've been here forever, come and go as they please. And, you know, I don't think that there's going to be, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think there's going to be any mass governmental disclosure about extraterrestrials. They are engaged with governments around the planet. They're trying to help us save ourselves. They can't do it for us, but that by their presence they can enlighten us. That, you know, we've taken a wrong path. Say that again, Robin?
I said, boy, we need somebody to.
Yeah, so, you know, I play my little part in terms of getting the word out. You know, I'm well past the age where I give a damn who thinks what about me or my story or my family story or what I've experienced in life. I'm here for a higher purpose. And so I guess...
And I guess that comes along with, you know, you're also big into human rights, you know, advocacy and animal rights and outspoken member of the global community. I mean, is that kind of what drives your passion to be an advocate on so many issues?
Oh, Robin, you've been doing your homework on me, haven't you, girl?
Well,
you have.
And then I have to follow up to find out what half this means. I'm not the brightest crayon in the box.
As my father likes to say, you know, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but there's no denying what's right there in the sky. Yes, I am. I am an advocate I am a human rights advocate. I do have a tendency to make a loud noise in terms of abuse and injustice. And, you know, to me, silence on any subject is tacit approval of what's going on. And so, yes, I am a women's rights advocate. I am a gay rights advocate. I am an advocate for human beings, you know, and for creatures, great and small. And that's part of my job in the world. You know, I think that everybody, two-legged, four-legged, has a right to be here. Shouldn't just be decimated on a whim by someone else, you know. I have been fighting for the elephants and fighting for the tigers and fighting for you name it. If it walks the planet and it's endangered, I'm screaming to save it. And, yeah, that's my job. But that's also part of my attachment extraterrestrially. I don't worry so much about geopolitics. My concern is exopolitics, how we, planet Earth, are going to get on in the future with the galactic family, as it were, and how we're going to find our right and proper place and not destroy ourselves. You know, and we're on the brink. You know, let it be known. We're on the brink. Climate change is real, folks. I don't care what you've heard by your, you know, local politician. Climate change is real, and we have screwed our planet to the wall. And if we don't start doing something, really doing something about this very, very soon, we're going to pass the point of no return. And this planet will become uninhabitable. And it won't happen in my generation, and it won't happen, you know, in the grandchildren's generation, but it will happen. And, you know, we have to be responsible for that because, you know, we created the problem by living the way that we do on this planet. We live in opposition to nature. We use it and expend our resources as though they're infinitely renewable, and they are not. We have to change our way of thinking around everything, and that's why I'm here. And I'm really glad that I managed to stuff this much information into an hour show. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, if you want to tell anybody how to purchase a copy of your book and any contact information you want to share, because we're down to the last 3 minutes, go ahead and let people know.
Okay, great. Well, first of all you have to do is Google my name, Andrea Perron. You can find me anywhere. I'm on Facebook. I have 5 pages on Facebook. You can listen to archived shows of my show with George, A World Awakening. You can find all of my books at Author House, one word, lowercase, authorhouse.com or Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get my books anywhere. They're available literally anywhere through any bookseller. And also visit our In a Flicker fan page on Facebook, which is awesome. It's really great. George did that. Or please check out our In a Flicker novel, all lowercase, inaflickernovel.com, or my website, houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com. I'm just out doing my thing, folks, and spreading light and love. That's why I got planted on the planet. And I'm very, very happy to have joined you tonight. I appreciate your listeners and for giving me this forum to put my message out into the world. I truly do. Thank you very much.
We appreciate you coming on. We really did enjoy it. It's amazing. Love the story.
Well, believe me, we scraped the tip of the iceberg tonight. There is so much more. So, if you dare delve into In a Flicker, and if you really are brave, delve into the trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light, and it will change the way you think and feel about everything for the rest of your life.
Oh, I will. And that's what I keep telling the network. They're going to have to give me 2-hour shows. But we do appreciate you coming on, and we really do. We can't thank you enough, and and the insights and your amazing life. There's no more else I can say. I don't think there's a word for it.
Bless your hearts. You have a wonderful evening, and thank you again. I'll join you again anytime.
Thank you, Andrea, so much.
Have a wonderful night, dear.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, people, that's it for us tonight. Next week, we'll have outlaw poet Ron Whitehead on March 24th, and it'll be 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And, Robin, I'm going to let you have the final words. You got 20 seconds.
I just would like everyone, we had a very sad and
Little Caesars has 5 hot and ready items at only $5 each. Choose from a large hot and ready classic, 8-piece Caesar wings, 4 20-ounce beverages, family-sized bacon cheddar loaded Crazy Bites, or new family-sized cinnamon loaded Crazy Bites. It's a deal so great, even my newborn is excited. What's that? She just said cinnamon loaded Crazy Bites? Her first words. $5 hot and ready deals only at Little Caesars. At participating locations plus tax.
Pizza, pizza.